Okay. And now I hear it. Good evening. Thank you for coming. You deserve a medal for coming when you could be clutching a glass outside the Hotel Brufani, but you've come to hear us speak about media freedom. My name is Damian Tambini. I'm based at the London School of Economics. I'm the author of this book, which we will not be discussing today, but I just thought I'd bring it along for product placement. Our topic today is the European Media Freedom Act, and we have a really wonderful panel of guests to discuss it. I'm going to introduce them quickly, just by name, starting with my left, for Elda Brogi, who is from the European University Institute. I've been working and collaborating with Elda on a number of academic projects looking at the issues such as media pluralism, and she has been running a centre on media pluralism and media freedom at the European University Institute, which is really doing wonderful work, putting some research behind a lot of the rhetoric that we hear about those topics. Meera Selva, to my left, is based at Oxford University, where she has been head of programs at the Reuters Journalism Foundation, and she can say a little bit more about how their research has been monitoring and studying the impact of technological change and a range of other challenges on the outlook for media pluralism and media freedom. I'm going to mangle the pronunciation of your name, Yavuz. Yavuz. So you can briefly introduce yourself to make sure that I don't do the pronunciation wrong. Yavuz.
Okay. Yavuz Baydar.
Yavuz Baydar. It's not so hard. Yavuz is here representing journalism and the experience of pressure from state censorship and state harassment. Yavuz runs a portal for independent Turkish media. He is based in France, so he has both an internal EU view and an external EU view, and given that very often the role of the European Union in promoting media freedom is strongest at the moment of accession, I think the Turkish view is a very interesting one to have, particularly on the day where we see how quickly the European Union in Ukraine, for example, is promoting a Europe based on democracy and values, not merely on markets, and using accession and invitation to membership of the European Union as part of that. And we can ask whether that will be conditional, and that kind of membership of the European Union can be conditional on meeting standards of media freedom, and that's one of the things we'll speak about. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to just set the scene and with what the European Media Freedom Act does. The European Media Freedom Act, we don't know a great deal about. It's interesting that the EU commissioners have announced quite loudly that there will be a Media Freedom Act, and that's building on experience of criticism, particularly of Hungary and Poland, particularly of control of state and public service media in those two countries, and other forms of pressure and harassment of independent journalism. The European Union has announced it's going to bring forward legislation, and they have consulted. Some people in this room may have responded to an EU consultation. So what we know about the Media Freedom Act, we know because we can think about the questions that were in the consultation, what kind of policy frameworks they're thinking about, what they're going to put in it. There are a range of things, and the first really important thing about this, and I think the first question to ask, and Elda can help us here, is what is the role of the European Union in this? And what is the legal basis for the European Union to do anything here? And I think what we find is that the competences, the legal basis of what the EU does is based on single market powers. So the potential for control of the media to create problems for the European single market. So what the EU is doing is very delicate because they're using what could be seen as quite a weak competence to create new legal instruments to put pressure on member states in a very sensitive area. So, Elda, maybe I should speak to you first and ask really how you see this Media Freedom Act developing, what is the basis of it, and how it relates to the kind of research that you've done on media pluralism and media freedom.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Damian, for this great introduction, indeed. Well, as Damian said, I am somehow representing here a project that is run at the European University Institute in Florence, that is the Media Pluralism Monitor. What do we do at the European University Institute, at the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom? On a regular basis, we analyze, taking into account a set of indicators that consist of 200 questions that cover legal, economic, and socio-political instances. We analyze the risks for media pluralism in the 27 member states of the European Union and in the 5 candidate countries. So here is where my interest, let's say, for the topic comes. And what do we analyze, I mean, within this project? We see that there are some trends at European level that show us how, in the end, there are similar problems that are tackled by different member states of the European Union. And there are similar principles, of course, that are on the basis, that are the basis of the constitutional traditions of European Union that are somehow creating a European media sphere that is on the same level, on the same time, so unique, so unified to some extent, and so diverse on the other. What are the main threats that we face when we analyze media pluralism in the EU member states and in candidate countries? We find media concentration, political capture of media, financial resources allocated in non-transparent and discriminatory way to media outlets, lack of independence of media regulators, reduced viability of media markets, and of course we see that journalism is facing a big crisis, and some of these problems are due also to the technological development and the rising role of the platforms in the information and in the media market. So the European Union also analyzing the results themselves of the MPM and seeing what is going on at national level, as Damian said, specifically in some countries, has developed this, let's say, conscience somehow that something should be done also at European level in order to face the threats to media pluralism, to media freedom that the new media environment is bringing to us. I mean, and I must say that the Media Freedom Act is one of the initiatives somehow that was announced by the Commission, but so far the European Union has done, I must say, a lot, probably, something that is not so blatant like a European Media Freedom Act that is also in the title, has this media freedom very evident, but the European Union is already doing a lot in terms of support to journalists, support to media freedom, and in particular to the rule of law and to media freedom and media pluralism based on the rule of law. I must say, and then I'll come to the question of Damian, that already probably there are various trends on which the European Union is working on. One, I must say, the one of the rule of law. You know that since 2020, the European Commission issues a report on the state of play of the rule of law, the compliance with the rule of law at national level, at member state level. And one of the chapters, let's say, that covers within the rule of law is exactly media freedom and media plurality. The European Union is working on media freedom when issues recommendations for safety of journalists in order to support journalists and their safety, acknowledging that there is a problem of safety of journalists in Europe and beyond. It has published some recommendation in this regard. Is working in order to regulate the phenomenon of strategic lawsuits against public participation, so the so-called SLAPs. It is working on media freedom when it deals with the big problem, let's say, of disinformation, and in particular disinformation online, but not only. The recent cases of Russia Today and Sputnik, the ban of Russia Today and Sputnik, are another very relevant intervention, let's say, of the EU in this regard.
But not an intervention in favor of media freedom.
Yes, as I say, they are. It's an intervention that deals, let's say, with media freedom to some extent. We could open a discussion on whether it was for good or for bad. But indeed. I try to demonstrate somehow that the role of the EU is expanding. And then here it comes, the Media Freedom Act. What could be the added value of the Media Freedom Act? First of all, to focus exactly on the topic, so media freedom. And here we come to the question of the competences. Does the European Union have the competence to issue an act on media freedom?
Okay, I'm gonna pause you there because you posed the question very well. Does it have the competence? But you also gave a really good list of all of the things that the EU is doing to promote media freedom. So I think we'll deal with those. I want to turn to somebody who has concrete experience in a country which, arguably has had different phases of negotiating potential possible membership of the EU. So you're looking at accession countries, but Turkey is a potential accession country. With perhaps the worst press freedom record in the world, certainly alongside China, more journalists locked up in Turkey than per head of population, I think, than any country. Can you say a little bit about how reassuring and useful you would find that? Also, imagining that you were in a potential candidate country, or even in a country like Hungary and Poland, where there have been real problems of control, particularly of broadcasters. Are you infused by the EU getting involved here? Or are there other things you think should be done?
Thank you, Damon. I think it's a step, in my opinion, long overdue to tackle some serious issues. You used the word potential. There's no potential anymore. That is over. I mean, nobody should have any illusions about Turkey becoming a member of the European Union, to be realistic. I mean, this is, that was a decade ago when things turned seriously south, and usually when things turn seriously south in terms of autocracy, there's no way back. Turkey is farthest away from Copenhagen criteria possible right now. It's a state, the regime that's from sort of snowballing from a soft autocracy towards a police state right now. And if the next elections offer the way in potentials or possibilities for Erdogan to win again, which is very possible, then we will move towards a phase of totalitarianism. But back to what we can draw, what sort of lessons we can draw from Turkish example is, I will come back, I will not be too long about this, but I said this is long overdue, especially now that Hungary and Poland, especially on public service media, are really experimenting or engineering sort of anti-journalism activities. Now it's high time. And in terms of Turkey snowballing into autocracy and harder types of autocracy, means that in a country there are no separation of powers, and as you mentioned, rule of law practically collapsed because of the capture of the judiciary, particularly on mid and high levels. Now the Constitutional Court, for example, it was 8-7. Now it's 10-5 in favor of the current administration. So going to the fourth estate, which was enjoying some sort of thaw in the early years of millennia, is now practically captured by the regime, up to 94%, which IPI's latest findings show. Direct or indirect control from palace of the content, which leads to massive censorship, fake news, all sorts of propaganda, and also self-censorship indirectly. And this means a tiny bit of so-called opposition media. I hate the word opposition media, because opposition is something that is to be linked with political activity. Critical media is the right word, in my opinion, or alternative media. Critical media is inefficient in terms of reaching out. In such experiments, you may see it, maybe I'm not so deeply knowledgeable about what happened in Poland, but the main target in such processes, like in Hungary or Poland, I would not be surprised if the TV as a medium is the prime target. because UNESCO figures show in Turkey, as well as in Russia, Belarus, and countries like Egypt as well, up to between 85 and 90% of the public get news only and only from TV, especially on the rural sides where internet connections are also weak. So this is what happened in Turkey, that there are almost no private TV channels that are beyond the control of the palace. And this is an ongoing, anything that happens in the Turkish TV channel that could be critical unleashes a massive wave of punitive measures.
So
to end that, I will also mention public service, which was in the early years of when the negotiations were warm. There were hopes that TRT, the Turkish state broadcaster in the context of Cold War formats, was going to be reformed into a public broadcaster. That was our expectations, because Turkey, if it wanted to be seriously, proceed to a membership, it needed a proper public discourse. The reverse happened, and it also delivered a serious blow to all the hopes of, political systemic reform. And that's, I think, the main lesson that one should learn from the Turkish experience. But there are other aspects, but I will get back to it. I don't want to be long.
So what you said about the importance of media, the failure of transforming state media into public service media, the importance of television, would suggest that the list which Elda gave, and what we know from the consultation of the European Union, that their priority, which is to protect the independence of public service media and to protect the independence of regulators, one of their shopping list of policies is spot on and could be very important. I'm going to turn to Meera. You're in transition. You're going to be working in a big NGO, campaigning and lobbying in this area at the European level, as well as presumably in the UK and elsewhere. What do you see as the priorities, and what do you think that what more could be done, and how does it relate to what you think are the real challenges to media freedom, based on research and your experience?
Thanks very much, Damian. I'm going to take it back to the journalist level, because I did a report a couple of years ago on press freedom in Central and Eastern Europe, and it's really kind of, Turkey's a warning sign of where we could go. And so I did a study where I can basically survey journalists on the ground about what do you think are the kind of biggest threats and what do you need. And I think the issues they raised really need to be discussed at a European level, at a kind of policy level, because at the moment there's a sense we're relying too much on the individual heroism and resilience of journalists, and when actually there needs to be institutional support for what they do. And so there were kind of 6 things that were raised. The first one, which will be addressed in this act, is the kind of weaponization of state advertising, which is where governments very deliberately give advertising revenue to, friendly media outlets, and this in turn sends a signal to the big private corporations who do the same because they don't want to anger the government and kind of cross them. And this has had a huge impact on all media, but especially the kind of digital outlets, the newer digital outlets that sprang up, to the extent where they've all pivoted their business strategies away from advertising completely and focused on membership, which is much more labor intensive, much more spotty, requires a lot of work, and it's just where they're going. And I think this needs to be kind of brought into the conversation about financial viability of the media, and to make sure that these outlets cannot just be kind of repeatedly crushed by tweaks to the law. The second one was the kind of online attacks that journalists come under, kind of online trolling and really vicious coordinated attacks, often at state level. And this is something that the EU can and does address in different ways through platform regulation and kind of the monitoring regulation of hate speech, but there's also another element of it which is about sanctioning the politicians who incite these attacks on journalists verbally and online as well, which I think is something that it's difficult to kind of address, but in the context of press freedom again, because you don't want to go too far on censoring speech online, but it is done deliberately to chill independent journalism and to attack press freedom. That is the reason it's done, not because someone feels so strongly that they want to express their opinion. The third one is the kind of the privacy concerns that journalists in the region face, which is huge amounts of surveillance. They're kind of, their phones are bugged. They're hacked routinely. They're doxed, and this affects their own personal safety, but also crucially the safety of their sources and the willingness of sources to come forward. And again, this needs to be kind of looked into and kind of addressed. The fourth one is. You mentioned the rule of law and the physical safety of journalists, and we've seen in a lot of places in demonstrations, again, the authorities have not really acted within the law in how they deal with journalists. If they have not arrested them, they have picked them up at demonstrations and just driven them 3 hours away and left them on a roadside far away, thereby, not technically doing anything that can be either thought of as physical attack, but just a way of stopping them doing their jobs. And again, the right of journalists to cover demonstrations as part of their job needs to be protected. And the way we're seeing social movements across Europe, demonstrations are becoming more common, they're becoming more vital, they're becoming places where dissenting voices are heard, and it's really important that journalists are able to cover them, because if not, those conversations go online and into dark areas and spin out of control. The fifth one was the role of unions in the region, and again, there are unions. A lot of them are not that rated for defending press freedom, in that they're run by people who are kind of favourable to various government things, and again, often don't represent the younger generation, the digital journalists, women in the newsrooms. I think there's a sense of the role of unions, what protections they give their workers, and crucially how their membership and their leadership is decided, and how's that legislated for. And then the sixth one, which they would really welcome, is clear clarity from the European Union, or anybody really, about foreign investment, the role of foreign investment in media, because they have had to deal with accusations, very anti-Semitic attacks and accusations of treason whenever they've accepted any kind of foreign investment, at the same time that any kind of attempts to raise money domestically are being kind of squashed down. So those are the kind of the 6 points, and then on top of that, the kind of vast overarching thing of media ownership as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a really useful kind of shopping list, and I think I take your point, Elda, when you say, what is in the Media Freedom Act is only part of what the European Union is doing, and then there's a separate question of what do we want the European Union to be doing here, and what legal powers does the European Union have to do anything in this space anyway? But I mean, just to kind of sum up this initial, if you like, overview of what we think may be in the Act, and the mismatch between that and what you think maybe should be in the Act and needs doing. There are some things which are missing. The question of transparency of political advertising, transparency of advertising, and the fact that governments can use advertising budgets to manipulate the media very effectively. Maybe leaves aside things like, other forms of manipulation. We heard this morning on a panel about platform subsidies to journalism, and we need to be transparent about all forms of revenues potentially into the media, and also the role of things like unions and other organisations. The consultation does look at things like self-regulation and codes insofar as they're relevant. But let's move on to that question of what the EU can do. Because, I mean, is it true to say that I think the European Union, in some senses, it feels a little bit like a turning point, particularly where you have the President of the European Union, on the barricades, literally on the barricades, in the defence of democracy, and you then see that the old criticism that the European Union was only all about markets and single market and harmonization seems to be giving way to a world in which maybe there will be some political will behind a values-based defense of media freedom. But the treaties are still relatively weak, aren't they? So isn't the EU constrained by the fact that it can only really do things to protect the integrity of the single market? Is that the case?
Actually, I mean, dealing in this room, there are people that are working on this very topic. Indeed, there is some kind of constraint by the treaties. The European Union is mostly economic union. But indeed, I think that on one hand, it has developed or should develop into a more political, let's say, entity on one hand, because just for an issue of, let's say, geographical and size and the need to create, let's say, a critical mass, if I may, to tackle the threats or to, in any case, have again a critical mass to deal with other sovereign states on one hand, like we are seeing now, or with big online platforms. So we need that the European Union does a step further in order to be, let's say, more political, to, be strong in upholding the rule of law and democracy on one hand. But indeed, we have the constraints of the treaties so far. That's why the action of the European Union should work with the ingredients it has so far that are the best ingredient that it can use based on the treaties is Article 114 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, exactly on the harmonization of the internal market. I mean, that is harmonization, approximation of legislations for the internal market. And in this regard, that's why I was stressing on one hand that there is a diversity and unity, let's say, in the media landscape in the European Union, because indeed we have similar constitutional principles. We don't have the same laws when it comes to protecting, for instance, the media market. That's why probably the European Union has to work on this fragmentation of national laws in terms of protection of pluralism, transparency of media ownership, state advertising, authorities, in order to build on the possibilities of harmonization, and in order to create the conditions for boosting, let's say, increasingly the conditions for media freedom and media plurality at European level. That's why when we discuss amongst us in our research of the potential content of the European Freedom Act, European Media Freedom Act, we look at first at an evolving definition of media. So far, I didn't mention the main piece of legislation of the European Union, that is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. It doesn't have a focus on media pluralism and media freedom, but indeed is already something that is in place, but should be, in my personal opinion expanded to all the media. I mean, if we want to effectively tackle media freedom at large.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you and briefly kind of summarize that there is this tension, isn't there? That in a sense, the EU wants to do something to protect these values, but the treaties are not giving it much to go on. There's another treaty, of course, the Treaty of Fundamental Rights in the EU, and it has the wording, freedom and pluralism of the media must be respected. Mm-hmm. Is that not useful here?
Not exactly, because it's the Charter for Fundamental Rights doesn't provide competences to the Union. Mm-hmm. You have to interpret the law when it is implemented in a way that is not against the principles of the Charter, but directly it doesn't give the power to act.
So it's I'm going to ask members of the audience to come in. If you have questions, the producers have given us the go-ahead that you can come to the front here and use this microphone. So do indicate if you have questions and comments. And presumably some of you will have been observing the consultation or maybe even have submitted. So we'd be really keen to hear from you. I know you mentioned also that there are other challenges to independence, including from owners of media. Do you want to expand on that?
First of all, Meera laid it out very well. All of these issues are overlapping with what we are experiencing to a very deep level. I'm afraid if these issues are not really approached properly, as you mentioned, the word independence should be there as well, because the key concept is the editorial independence. It must be, everything must be done to ensure editorial independence, as well as freedom and plurality. These three are basically, it's a tripod. Regarding media ownership, that's the beast. It's the elephant in the room. I have a distinguished colleague from Albania here in the audience, and when we discuss from time to time, we always end up with this. The media ownership was an issue remained as an issue for the Council of Europe for more than 2 decades, and one recommendation after the other just to handle it properly so that the fourth estate is ensured some form of editorial independence. To know it was in vain, basically. It was, you can just recommend in Council of Europe is Council of Europe this. And all these were, going from one ear and going from the other ear. They didn't really care. And, what's the state of Council of Europe right now? They are basically ignored by the member states, topped by Russia, which is no longer there, and Azerbaijan and Turkey, etc. So I would really underline the issue. Maybe a universal criteria to ensure media ownership within the domain of European Union may be necessary, because in post-truth age, where we see more and more results of that, like Hungary, Poland, Russia, Belarus, etc., Turkey, these are post-truth societies. And, truth must be told more boldly in this age. So this is one issue that I wanted to bring. And regarding just a quick 2-3 notes about union membership, unions. This is a very useful way for autocrats to push for self-censorship. In Turkey, it's only 7%. 93 out of 100 journalists are stripped off their rights to properly mention it, because what the media owners did, and most of them are corrupt, chase out basically union representatives from their own media outlets. As you know, the basic principle is a corrupt media cannot cover corruption. It's impossible. And this was one way. And second, one important point. Second is the state advertisement. That is used as a weapon more and more in the critical media, especially newspapers. On the left flank, tiny ones, like 5,000, 7,000, 8,000 into circulation, they are fiercely dependent on state advertisement, and they are no longer receiving it, and they are screaming, now we are dying, but nobody pays any attention to this. And accreditation was another tool, another weapon in the past 2-3 years, more visibly. The one authority newly established called Directorate of Communications subordinated reporting directly to the president, a sort of Goebbelsian institution actually, which oversees the entire machinery of the media. They are given authority to cancel or issue accreditations and press cards, which is another issue that should be ensured, that press cards should not be given by an institution that has any links to a state or government, which is the case in Turkey. So these are important. Regulator bodies, one final note, is excellent that you mentioned it. It's one of the rules in the transformation, that everything going south. Now, Radio Television Supreme Board, seen as very useful by the regime, by any regime, to control issue fines and basically close TV especially. So maybe one important factor to consider is that in this Media Freedom Act context, a regulator body that oversees all the regulator bodies, so that everything is universal, so that there are no no deviations from what should be done.
So just because you mentioned the Council of Europe and their recommendations and how they are ignored, and the Council of Europe is a broken institution, I should say that that Elda and I are the authors of several Council of Europe recommendations as part of expert groups, including the Council of Europe recommendation on transparency of media ownership. But one of the interesting things about the Media Freedom Act is that some of these things might be given a little bit more legal weight. So what they're talking about is legal duties on media companies to disclose real data on media ownership structures, flow of funds, advertising revenues, these kinds of things. So completely take your point, but you could make the point that the Council of Europe has been developing these standards and creating the kind of soft understanding within the Council of Europe, which is obviously a much bigger group than the European Union. But I mean, we're entering the final stage of the seminar, and I just wanted to just try and think about what seems to be a context of really rapid change in the European Union, and that the conflict in Ukraine might be a constitutive kind of event and a change to the European Union that becomes much deeper and more focused on protecting democratic values. And it's not just the Media Freedom Act, it's a range of other laws and standards, which may include other things like standards on accreditation of journalists, which I think are very important. And invite also contributions from the audience if there are any, but my colleagues here to reflect on whether it is in fact possible to actually predict and control or outlaw the ways in which states will control the media. I mean, one of the things, I will mention it in my book, is looking historically at the much longer term in media freedom, going back to press and broadcasting freedom, and thinking in the future to this new internet-based media, is that states change the playbook. They look to find ways to control the media, and they're very creative. And if it's not control of advertising budgets or control of spectrum, or control of journalists in other ways, that it's very difficult to predict the ways in which states will do this, which is why Elda and I have also been involved in another Council of Europe recommendation, which is the recommendation which was released yesterday on principles for media and communication governance, which I advise you, all of those who are interested in media and communication governance, you can find it on the Council of Europe website. I know Yavuz, you will be rushing there because he thinks these recommendations are so useful. But what I think it does is set out some standards for new forms of governance. And also, what I think is really important is also trying to come up with some kind of way in which the European Union and other standard-setting bodies can promote executive restraint and try and control the executive in a slightly more general way from seeking ways of controlling the media. So the way the Media Freedom Act is proceeding is to try and find a list of prohibitions and identify all the things that are going wrong. And there may be a sense that that's looking in the rear-view mirror to navigate to a certain extent. And I'm not sure. I don't know, Meera, if you...
I mean, I just had a kind of wider question, which is, why are member state governments going to sign up to this? Because, as you said, all governments want their own ways of dealing with the media. And if you look at Italy, if you look at, well, the UK is not part of the European Union, but the debate on public sector broadcasting here, if you look at, what's going to happen with the French elections, there are governments that don't trust the existing kind of idea of media as something to be protected and defended, and believe there needs to be a kind of break and then a rebuilding. And then the other thing is, again, whether the populations will be behind this movement, because there is a kind of falling trust in media and a kind of general disconnect, a kind of rising news avoidance and a rising sense that much of the media that's being talked about in this act is not really relevant, and people won't necessarily say that it's something, might not be the thing that they're willing to fight for.
I mean, I have a view on that. I don't want to monopolise here. I don't know, Elda, if you want to come in.
Well, I think that indeed we have to look at this Media Freedom Act with looking at the future to some extent, and thinking of this new governance of the media system. Yeah, because I am sure that at national level there will be some opposition. Already we know that not all the member states are fully, let's say, happy with this idea of the Media Freedom Act. But on the other hand, again, I think that time is ripe. At a certain moment, we have to do this step and think of something that is also future-proof. I mean, the recommendation on the media governance goes in this sense on one hand. Also, the other recommendations that we wrote, consider what we wrote, the recommendation on advertising an election in the end, on advertising online. I mean, the communication is changing a lot. I think that there is a common interest in tackling all these developments in a single way. Let's say it's the single market, but it's also a single way to think of the governance of the future. Indeed, everything is changing. The audience is changing. We don't have to look at this Media Freedom Act as a way to support just the existing, but to build, for instance. We realize, for instance, that there is no data not only on traditional ownership, media ownership, but the problem is also the future, how to monitor, to map better, than monitor what is going on in the online environment, what are the dynamics that are developing in the online environment. So I think that this is an opportunity, at least, to think of what is needed for the future. Of course, there will be a resistance. I'm sure that it won't be easy. But I hope that it will be at least an occasion to discuss problems that will be the problems of the future for sure.
So I think you raise a really important point, and then the last 10 minutes of this session, unless people have other questions, I want to just focus on that question of communicating these kinds of issues. And Meera asked, will governments sign up to this? You know, will there be resistance, as you put it, Elda? I mean, again, to refer to my recently published book, I think the lessons of history, if you look at the history of press freedom and so forth, is that the media fight for their own freedom. And they fight for all of the privileges that they've enjoyed in terms of whether that's in the tax system or in terms of freedom of the press more generally, and the regulatory settlement that they've enjoyed until now. And I think as we kind of try and bring democracy together with this new paradigm of media institutions, we need to have that in mind, that the journalists that are covering all of these debates, the journalists that are for example, also engaging with this Media Freedom Act, need to do so in a positive way. I mean, my experience sometimes of journalists tend to see regulation as inherently bad and something to be resisted on all costs. And one of the interesting things about the Media Freedom Act is that this is an example of public authorities, institutions trying to create institutions according to values. So I would ask, all of the journalists in the room to really think about how to present this in a positive way in terms of how the EU is genuinely trying to support media freedom. And I want to hear, as a final point from each of the panelists, something about how they think. Do you have a question? Do come up, but while you're coming up, I'd like to just tip off my panelists about the final question, to say what they think should be the priorities in the Media Freedom Act, what you think isn't there, to sum up, and should be perhaps, but also a little bit about how you think you would advise journalists covering this, and how they should communicate the importance of this kind of an instrument to a wider audience and make the positive case for it. So do go ahead and put your question. Thank you.
My name is Akanksha, and I work with Deutsche Welle.
Press the button, please.
Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. I work with Deutsche Welle, with the Asia team there. My quick question is, you're talking about resistance and convergence of different countries, whether or not they will on these points that we mentioned. And we were talking earlier about Turkey, but why look at Turkey and go that far and not look at an example such as Hungary? In this day and age, we saw as an example of what happened with the CEU there. What kind of challenges can the governments, in countries like that could pose to us? How would you address, say, like a country-specific issues that might come out? For example, if we talk about just the foreign like the investments in media ownership over there, where governments are, and it's just not only in the EU. I come from India. This is a big problem there as well. There's no foreign funding allowed in media ownership there. What kind of regulations? How do you counter something like that? Say if it's coming from the Hungarian government.
Do you want to take that?
No, just we have very little time.
I mean, I think it goes back to my earlier point about how the playbook changes, and you see a huge amount of creativity in the way that various forms of rules are used, not in the way that they're intended. And I think that they're, one of the things we haven't talked about is the potential that, that even these kinds of rules could be implemented in ways which are not intended and could be used to create problems for media freedom. So in Hungary, you have situations in which foreign ownership rules are being used to manipulate the ownership of particular channels, which I think it's a subsidiary of Discovery Channel, which had remained one of the more independent factual information outlets in Hungary, and the government has effectively used ownership rules to withdraw their license. And in another environment, of course, those same ownership rules may be extremely important for protecting domestic production, domestic news provision, and also avoiding manipulation by foreign actors, for example. So there is a real difficulty in developing common one-size-fits-all standards, and subsidiarity within the regime is going to be extremely important. I don't know if you've come across any of this in relation to NPM.
Yes, indeed, any member state has its own specificities, and there is no situation that, no solution that fits for all the cases, indeed. I think that for instance, a Media Freedom Act could be used to give all the tools at European level in order to better understand how the market works, and to react according also to the specificity of the country. I think that one of the added value of the Media Freedom Act could be, for instance, but again, this is my personal point of view, that the media regulators could work in a sort of regime of peer review. Using same rules, same principle-based rules at European level. The differences or the various national cases could be discussed and analyzed also in another level of regulatory coordination, let's say, in order to discuss exactly also the different cases at national level, how to take into account the specificity that are present at national level, or to overcome the differences and find, let's say, a solution that fits at European level. Now, I want to stress this because indeed there are many differences that should be somehow harmonized, and also on using practical means. And I think that indeed a European Media Freedom Act could work in this sense.
Okay, we're really running out of time, so I'm just going to give my panelists just 30 seconds or a minute to make any final points.
One point should be added, because we didn't talk about this growing, given the Hungary and Poland, etc., and Russia, we have an element of growing exile media and then diaspora media. They should be ensured to have protection in terms of independence, freedom, and safety. In this context. Now, one final note, there are more than 35 Russian journalists via Istanbul entering now to Czech Republic and Slovakia. And this will be a phenomenon that's going to stay, not only us, Turkish or Iranian or whatever. I mean, this will be sort of, a big European Union element that is permanentized in a way, as long as this volatility continues.
Absolutely, that I was about to say, journalists don't stay in their borders anymore. They have to operate outside the borders, and this is vital that they are protected. And the question of how do you as journalists sell this to how do you sell this? Well, this is partly to do with what media outlets have been doing with membership models. You have to tell the story of why you exist to your audiences. You need to directly counteract the kind of narratives of mistrust and the idea that the journalists are somehow part of an elite that are also trying to manipulate you, and you need to be transparent, you need to be direct, you need to advocate for yourself as journalists. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all your attention, and see you soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.